After so many years stuck in purgatory, Silent Hill is finally back on the gaming map. And although we already had 2 other releases before this game, Silent Hill 2 Remake is the first one that has felt like a proper, confident revival of the series. Before this we had Short Message, which I can't comment on since I don't have a PS5, as well as Ascension, which feels more like a money laundering scheme than a revival. But Silent Hill 2? Oh my god. With all the negativity surrounding Bloober Team's involvement, and the less than flattering trailers we kept getting thanks to Konami's inability to market games, it felt like this game was destined to flop. But what do you know? Now that the game has come out, everyone is suddenly praising Bloober for how great of a job they did, and even considering Silent Hill 2 as a Game of the Year contender. Personally, while I did think the game was going to be decent, never in a million years did I think it would be this impressive in practically all aspects. So now I want to gladly take you through the whole game, analyzing what I like about each section and also what doesn't work about some aspect of the game. And obviously there will be spoilers for the entire game ahead. Now I don't think I need to dwell too much on the presentation because it's easily apparent what a fantastic job Bloober did on the visuals and sound design. The game is so immersive thanks to the sheer amount of detail in the environments and all the layers of sound that invade your eardrums at any given moment. It absolutely lives up to the original's legacy, and frankly sometimes surpasses it. I particularly think the fog effects are impressive as hell, and just walking around the town is probably my favorite part of the presentation in this game. Of course, I also have to mention Masahiro Ito and Akira Yamaoka for their contributions to enemy designs and soundtrack respectively. The soundtrack in particular, oh my god is it gorgeous. Akira Yamaoka is my favorite composer ever, and he just never misses. What I like about his remixes here is that the compositions feel denser, like fuller songs rather than ambient tracks. I can see an argument that it takes away from the dreamlike quality of the game, but the songs are so good that I don't really care. My only complaint for the visuals really is Maria's character design, as I and many others think her new dress is far inferior to the originals in terms of showcasing her personality and backstory, and simply in its uniqueness. All the other characters though look great. I especially love how James looks and sounds in this game, although his expressions in some of the more important scenes don't always fit with the tone of the scene. The best thing they added to this game is the in-game save screen. James's goofy ass faces make my day. The voice acting is also really good, but again there are just some specific moments where it doesn't sound quite right or lessens the impact of a scene. I won't be touching on the story much as there's plenty of people that can do that much better than I can, but my thoughts on how James was done can be spread across the whole game. I want to focus on the gameplay analysis for this video.
I see that you didn't make it out yet.
Yeah. I just didn't get around to it yet.
Full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
I really liked Bloober's approach to the combat in the remake. It has more depth, with enemies being more aggressive and having several attacks that you have to learn to dodge. Or you could just shoot the legs and knock them out with a stick. If you decide to play like this, the game becomes infinitely easier. But I stuck to dodging mostly in my first playthrough as I found it more fun and challenging, even if it's not the optimal way to play. I saw people complaining about the enemy variety, but the original had the same problem and no one seemed to complain about it there. If anything, I think they used the limited number of enemies to their fullest. Each enemy type has several variations, with my favorite enemy easily being the mannequins. The normal type's new behavior is so cool and creepy, sometimes even funny. They hide behind walls or try to blend in with the environment, which makes for a really engaging dynamic where you can actually sneak up on them if you notice what they're doing. But the other variant is what steals the show for me. The crawling mannequins are easy to kill, yet terrifying because of their speed and numbers. They only really have one attack, but that's all they need since their presence alone is enough to put you on edge. Then you have what is basically the standard zombie enemy of Silent Hill 2, which is the lion figure. They're pretty easy to beat, but I will say the weaker variant that bursts with poison after dying can be very annoying when dealing with multiple enemies, as the poison lingers for 5 to 10 seconds. Still not sure how I feel about this one. Bobblehead nurses are the hardest ones to deal with outside of the bosses because of their insane aggression, especially the knife variants. What makes it even harder is that even if you're out of their attack range visually, they will still slide towards you. I think this is a weird addition that ruins the flow of combat, and happens with the other enemies as well. Why am I being punished for thinking about my position in fights? It feels counterintuitive. I've got to say, on replay I realized just how poorly this game handles multiple enemies, especially in narrow corridors. The camera breaks down completely and actions take so long to do by design that you physically can't deal with two enemies that are attacking at separate times, since dodging one means getting hit by the other. I also think there are a few too many forced combat encounters throughout the game, which highlight these issues even more, but I will talk about it when I get to them. So is the combat janky as hell? Yes. Do I still enjoy it? I'd say so. The resource management in this remake is way better than in the original. You had to actively try to waste bullets to even start to run out of them, but here, I was constantly low on bullets and health items, at least on hard mode on my first playthrough, which is a good thing. Second playthroughs are usually way easier in survival horror games. But the first playthrough felt more like survival horror than most of the recent Resident Evil games, or Alan Wake 2, which I really appreciated. And that's not even getting into the level design, which is amazing most of the time, although a bit bloated in places. I'll be getting to the details of that when I talk about all the areas. The exploration is amazing thanks to said level design and the extra addition of breakable windows on buildings, cabinets, and cars. It is such an organic addition and is so good, I had to break every window in my vicinity. The game starts off nearly identically to the original, with the only differences being some extra steps before you get to the main part of Eastern South Vale. Not much to say here, it's a great build up to the first encounter and you seamlessly get into the main exploration bit of the town. Honestly, in terms of visuals, this is by far my favorite upgrade from the original, as I said. The fog effects are phenomenal and give me those mixed feelings of uneasiness and serenity that Silent Hill is so good at evoking. It is mesmerizing to walk around in, and is all the more immersive thanks to the slew of new buildings you're able to enter and explore, which give the town a stronger sense of character. Depending on how much you check out, you could spend almost an hour purely walking around before you even get to the first main area. This is of course expanded on when you reach the western part of South Vale, which has a lot more Easter eggs for some reason, like room 106 in the motel or the bowling alley, where the greatest line ever written is spoken. Both areas contain their little self-contained puzzles that feel more relaxed compared to the indoor sections. Apart from all the exploration you can do, the main objective is to solve this vinyl record puzzle in order to get to the apartment key. You go through a small apartment building to do so, and while there's not much in terms of interesting gameplay, I think it teaches all the traversal mechanics you'll be using later on pretty well in this confined space, even if they are severely overused. There's an awesome sequence after you find the apartment key where the wind picks up and the fog gets denser until you actually get into the apartment. Again, the visual effects are amazing, but the ambient and increased enemy count also help make this quite a stressful moment in the game. And the combat is not forced since you have plenty of room to avoid enemies, and is a very important distinction to later places. And with that, we finally reached the first big area of the game, the apartments. And what a strong start. This is my second favorite location in the remake, as I think it's very well paced and is the perfect length, unlike the following area. The level design is complex, but still feels readable without looking at the map every 5 seconds. It's not the scariest area in the game, but it's the most enjoyable to play when going off purely the gameplay. And that's, as I mentioned, in big part thanks to the pacing. The apartments nail the gameplay loop of running through rooms, searching for a key item, fending off enemies, cutscenes, and puzzle solving. There's not an overabundance of walls to break or gaps to crawl through, and the shortcuts you unlock feel meaningful and satisfying. One of my favorite moments in the game, when Pyramid Head is just chilling behind bars staring at you, still gives me goosebumps when I get to it. Like, I know he doesn't do anything, but his presence, his aura you could say, makes me feel on edge. There's also an overwhelming sense of mystery related to him, especially for first-time players. The sound effects are just amazing. The classic coin puzzle from the original returns, but with a much appreciated upgrade. I've got to say the puzzles are one of my favorite things about the Silent Hill series, and Bloober surprisingly really gets how to make engaging puzzles, with a combination of more demanding ones like this one, simple palette cleansers, and everything in between. After the cutscene with Pyramid Head, you finally enter the Otherworld for the first time. Unfortunately, the Otherworld also peaks with the apartment, as I much prefer it over the later sections. Anyways, what I haven't mentioned yet is how each area of the game has a central puzzle of sorts that leads to a significant location or end of an area. The coin puzzle was the one in the apartments, and here in the Otherworld is the broken grandfather clock from the original. I love this design for the areas. It creates a sort of anchor point for the whole section that you always have in your mind, and I think this puzzle is the best utilization of that. The room it's in gives really strong safe room vibes, especially with the ambience that accompanies it. And since you have to come back to it so many times, it fills that role amazingly. The main goal for this place is to get all the clock hands one by one, entering a previously locked door each time to get the next item and changing the surroundings in the process. It's executed very well, and I don't know, there's something about this section I really just love. The apartments end with the same Pyramid Head boss fight, if you could say that, as the original, although a bit more engaging thanks to his aggression. I really like the encounter, but at the same time, if you just run around in a circle, you can beat it with minimal engagement. It's the kind of thing where on the first time it's amazing, but then you don't pay much mind to it once you know about it. The music is a banger though. The next large area you go through is the most Silent Hill location ever, the hospital. And this place is huge. Too huge in fact, as it is my second least favorite in the game, despite the many great aspects about it. And that's mainly down to its pacing. They went way too overboard with the scope of the place and the number of puzzles and encounters, to the point where I wanted the area to be over by the time you move to the other world. Don't get me wrong, most of the puzzles are well designed, it's just the sheer amount of them you have to do before you progress gets kind of old. The most egregious thing about this is how much of a detour some of the key items are to get to. For example, you have to go up to the 3rd floor and explore most of it to find a key for a locked area on the 1st floor, which by the way mostly doesn't contain any key items apart from the path to the pool. This is all for the main area puzzle, the director's room, which is a good puzzle, but doesn't give that same anchor feeling as the one in Blue Creek Apartments that I was hoping for. You only really go in there once when you get all the key items, after which you're off to the roof and into a boss fight. And while yes, Silent Hill is known for leading you from key item to key item across a building, it does not work as well when the building is so large and there are so many possible rooms to check. Instead of feeling like meaningful progress, it starts to feel like padding, especially when you factor in this is still the first half of the hospital. Speaking of the boss fight, it's pretty damn cool. The Flesh Lips visual design is very faithful to the original, but it feels more like an actual boss thanks to the new phases added to the Flesh Lips. In terms of gameplay, it's an obvious improvement from the original in terms of how engaging it is. But at the same time, I think it lasts way too long and there's too much downtime. I don't know if I'm missing something, but it feels like the boss spends ages crawling around the ceiling and peeks out for a couple of seconds before repeating the process, which is not a fun boss fight loop in my opinion. The added aggression once the Flesh Lip starts pulling out metal bar legs is welcome, but the fight only really gets fun in the last phase where the boss keeps up the constant aggression. It's a pretty well telegraphed and intense fight that I wish you got to way sooner, instead of the constant stalling and chip damage. With the Flesh Lips out of the way, we get to the Otherworld, which I didn't enjoy nearly as much as the apartments. Part of that is definitely because of how long the normal hospital takes to get through. Like, I don't know, the level design is good, but it really is ruined by the size of the hospital. The knife nurses, as I said, I didn't really vibe with. They're too aggressive for the speed of the combat, and it feels like there's so many of them here. So with the level and encounters overstaying their welcome, that basically leaves the ambience to do the heavy lifting for my enjoyment. I will say the central puzzle is one of the better ones. The reveal of what's in the box was one of my favorite moments in the original, and here it's even funnier thanks to James's reaction. We finally finished the hospital with the Pyramid Head chase sequence, but something about it I don't jive with. It doesn't feel nearly as impactful as the original one. It might have to do with Maria not saying anything, which I found an extremely weird decision. But also there's some other element that left me disappointed with such an iconic encounter that I can't quite put my finger on. At least we're out of the hospital. Once you get out into the town at night is where, at least for me, the game really peaks with its atmosphere. Everything before this is great and all, but the atmosphere and horror with this and the prison is what truly sold me on the game being amazing. The soundscapes, the rain, these long corridors shrouded in darkness, I was fully immersed. While the amount of enemies can get obnoxious in places, thanks to the more open space, it's not nearly as bad as some of the other combat-heavy sections of the game. You can realistically avoid a large chunk of them altogether. The vibe in the park is one of my favorites in the game. The total darkness and especially the music accompanying this cutscene I feel is one of the moments that nails the original's mood the best.
Happy to see you.
While the atmosphere is strong throughout the whole game, it still often feels different from how it was in the original. That's not necessarily bad, but I will say I still prefer the original's tone more, so seeing a part that totally nails that was a highlight. Bonus points because this is a genuinely great addition to the story that wasn't in the original.
I better get going.
You still don't want me to go with you? If we stick together, we might just make it out of here.
Out of where?
This town. Silent.
The final stretch before the historical society on the long road where there are no enemies is quite striking as well. It gives a strong point of no return vibe as you keep walking and walking along this road, not seeing what's ahead at all. The descent deeper into the town continues inside the historical society, when you go down an eerily long staircase and proceed to jump through several gaping holes in the ground. A Silent Hill classic. After a completely sane talk with Eddie, we reach the prison, easily the scariest location in the remake. I love the suffocating atmosphere in each section of the prison, and the mannequins on the walls are what completes the whole thing. The progression here is structured slightly different from the areas so far, thanks to the central puzzle in the yard. Speaking of which, I'm kind of disappointed in how they handled this room. In the original, this was one of the most striking rooms in the game. The galloping noises, constantly accompanying the deafening silence, and the unnaturally large size of the room compared to everything else, made for an unforgettable memory for me that just doesn't hit nearly the same in the remake. Maybe that's partially to do with the third-person perspective, but also because after a certain point, the galloping sounds stop appearing for some reason. It ruins the whole allure of the place instead of making you question if something's there. Don't get me wrong though, I really like the puzzle here, with how you slowly open up specific parts of the prison and get a part of the puzzle in doing so. While the ambience is the strongest in the game, some of the set pieces are hit or miss. Mainly the shower room was very unappealing to me, with its generic enemies wake up after you pick up the key item scenario. It feels very out of place in a Silent Hill game. Also, the iconic mysterious monster whispering just doesn't hit right either, and this is definitely because of the camera. In the original, James would look up at an off-screen cell that had some things whispering coming from it. It played with the fear of the unknown perfectly, as we will never know what was actually in that cell, but there was definitely something in there. Well, in the remake, the sound itself is still creepy of course, but it's coming from somewhere behind the walls. Because of that, you don't really have that worry of will it come out? Can it even come out? It's just a creepy sound. It feels like all the other unsettling noise through locked door moments, instead of a distinct one. Anyways, the gallows puzzle got a massive upgrade. It's a more extended and involved puzzle that's satisfying to figure out and actually changes the solutions between runs, which I realized when I was recording this playthrough. With that, we get to the main boss fight of this area, the Abstract Daddy. Thematically, I think this is not exactly an improvement, but more of a different take on the subject matter from the original. The remake's interpretation is more detailed and gives more insight into Angela's backstory, rather than keeping the details more vague like the original did, which is just as valid of an approach of course. On the gameplay side though, I don't know man. People have been praising the bosses in the remake a lot, but I don't fully agree with that sentiment. When you do get to fight bosses in a single arena, I think they're great fights, but some of the fights are so drawn out. For this one, I can understand that they wanted to fit a lot of story elements into it, but from a gameplay standpoint, it's just running through a bunch of corridors for a few minutes until you finally get to properly fight the boss. Again, once you get to that final arena, I think it's a good boss, but the fight as a whole is not engaging enough for me to praise it as much as others do. With the absolute nightmare fuel that is Abstract Daddy defeated, we get to the Labyrinth. Of all the things to expand on, I'm just wondering how many people wanted the Labyrinth section to be longer. Because this might be the most unnecessary addition in the remake, and frankly completely throws off the otherwise pretty good pacing. The central cube puzzle is better than the original, but I still think it's kind of annoying to use. The first area you get to using it is the Rotten area, which is very boring. I honestly don't have much to say. Just why? I mean, the bug scouring when you shine your light is awesome, but this whole place could have been cut and I don't think anyone would bat an eye. And it's not even the worst one in the Labyrinth. The next section is the flooded area, which I'd say is definitely an improvement but still gets tedious with the sheer amount of ladders you go through. One of my biggest disappointments of the remake is that they didn't extend Pyramid Head's gameplay section. Instead, it somehow feels inferior to the originals, which is already not that involved. In this one, you have to actively come up to him to even remotely make him seem like a threat. In my first playthrough, after looking around, I realized that the great knife you usually get in this area in the original was nowhere to be found. Except Pyramid Head was now holding it instead of the spear he usually does. So by my logic, I thought this was gonna be a nemesis situation, where you need to shoot him full of lead to get an upgrade, or in this case, his knife. That's not the case, and I'll get to the real answer later. But goddamn did this make me annoyed. At least I think the music is one of the best tracks in the game. With Pyramid Head's brief encounter out of the way, we make it to the final section, the ruined area. The single worst section in the whole game. How did this make it to the final release? Why would you ever put an RE4 style combat sequence in a strictly survival horror game with intentionally slow and clunky combat where even 2 enemies already felt like too much for the system to handle? This is a baffling decision. It just doesn't make sense, and it keeps going and going for several rooms. There's not enough enemy variety by this point into the game to throw so many enemies that are mandatory to defeat. I guess I can respect them for at least varying up each room, but this whole labyrinth would be better off if they only included the flooded area. The Pyramid Head chase sequence after the ruined area is a cool visual, but entirely devoid of any uniqueness in terms of gameplay. To top it all off, the Great Knife is not even an unlockable weapon in this game. It's only used for story progression and James drops it afterwards. Oh, the horror. Nearly everything about this section was a dud. As it stands, the segmented level design and the linearity of this whole place is a slog to go through, and I would want to dissociate from this place entirely if it weren't for one saving grace: the Eddie boss fight. This fight is at least my top 3 for this game. It's an intense yet simple fight between 2 people. If Eddie gets a shot on you, you feel it. It does quite a bit of damage. There's no downtime between attacks as the pace is decided by how aggressive you want to be. It's a pure test of reactions and skill, while the atmosphere and setting keep it grounded in the Silent Hill world, without making it feel like a Resident Evil fight or anything like that. I will say sometimes it is way too easy to stunlock him and get to the next phase. It's great for speedrunning but slightly cheapens the intensity of the fight for me. And finally we get back into the town for a little bit before getting on the boat to James's final destination, the Lakeview Hotel. And my god, is it gorgeous. The outside garden is such a peaceful spot, despite its eeriness. Unlike the hospital's sprawling map, the hotel is much better paced with its more compact and straightforward level design. It's a breath of fresh air after the winding hallways of the Labyrinth. If that's what they were going for with that area, I guess they succeeded in making you feel relieved when you get out, because it puts me off replaying the game, honestly. Although I appreciate the shorter runtime, the combat and puzzles do run thin by this point in the game. The puzzles in particular have a little bit of a drop in quality, as they feel less engaging to solve and rely a lot more on pick up item and put it somewhere else. The main area puzzle especially is not engaging to me. It feels like a Resident Evil puzzle, and not in a good way. There are no new enemy types, and the abstract daddies from the original are removed entirely, which makes more sense lore-wise, but does highlight that the game is a bit too long for how much variety is on display. There is a neat Mandarin mini-boss, but it's not enough of a distraction. The ambience, at least for me, also takes a little bit of a hit. It trades the overwhelming vibe of the previous areas for something more laid back, intentionally or not, but I'm not 100% sure I'm on board. In general, the whole area is not that scary, even the employee elevator section where you don't have any resources. The dodge trivializes this section, and that's not mentioning how going into any door instantly puts you out of any harm's way. Frankly, the only thing this area succeeds in is reminding you how dark this game is, because you don't even have a flashlight. It's honestly kind of obnoxious when I think about it. All in all though, this is definitely a middle of the road area in the game. It doesn't reach the highs of the hospital, especially in terms of horror, but it also doesn't have the pacing issues like said hospital or Labyrinth. Once James finds out the truth, we switch to the other world one last time, but there's not really gameplay at this point. It's mostly building this absolutely depressing atmosphere thanks to the fantastic soundtrack, which I'm pretty sure is basically unchanged from the original. And while I love the mood it builds as you reach the end of the game, I'm not really sure where the music stops playing halfway through the area. I get when you reach the basement it has to switch, but it just feels like a strange choice before that. Now we just have 2 boss fights left, starting with a dual Pyramid Head fight, which is also one of my favorites for similar reasons to Eddie. It's a short fight with no downtime and well choreographed attacks. The aggression is tuned pretty well so as to not constantly overwhelm you with 2 Pyramid Heads, and they have enough attacks to not get old for the duration of the fight. It's crazy Bloober managed to make a better duo boss than From Software could in Elden Ring. The music is an absolute banger and one of my favorite tracks in the game. I don't have too much to say as this is just a great fight that I find more enjoyable than the final boss. Speaking of which, I don't mind this fight, but it falls into the same issues as some of the other bosses. It's drawn out, and the second phase is very similar to the Flesh Lip fight, with a lot of downtime to the point of annoyance and little time for attacks. I'm not the biggest fan of the swarm of flies or whatever it's supposed to be that's present in all the phases as well. They're not too bad, but when there's several of them and Maria is in the middle of an attack, it can feel quite unfair when you get hit. The first and third phases are better, but it all plays too similar to the Flesh Lip to feel final. As a final note, I got the leave ending in this playthrough, and I really didn't like how they handled it in this remake because of 2 main things. The acting in the letter reading did not feel as gut-wrenching as the original. Not bad per se, but like it was missing the right emotion for the script. It's not bad by any means, but the original is such a high bar to reach that I don't think it will ever be beaten. The more egregious thing though is the soundtrack choice. The original has this really minimalistic, tranquil piece, literally called Peace and Serenity, that perfectly complemented the somber tone of the ending. The remake instead overdoes the instrumentation and makes the track sound a bit creepy, which ruins what is supposed to be a reflective moment for James and the player. It creates a tonal clash between the contents of the letter and the mood the song evokes. But with that, I basically condensed most of what I wanted to say about Silent Hill 2 Remake. The game has a lot of issues, yes, but it also nails a lot of the important things about Silent Hill in a way that leaves me hopeful for future installments. Silent Hill 2 Remake definitely does not replace the original, but instead provides a different perspective on that experience with its own mood and atmosphere. With how successful the game is looking to be both critically and commercially, I think it's safe to assume more remakes will be on the way from Bloober sooner rather than later. And while I don't mind it that much as long as the games are as good or even better than this remake, at the same time I will always prefer getting a fresh experience like the other upcoming Silent Hill games, rather than retreading old grounds over and over again. All I hope for now is that those other Silent Hill projects get the care they deserve, and that Konami will find a way to port the original games, so that the two good versions of Silent Hill 2 can coexist and be experienced by all fans. With that, please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this analysis. I really appreciate anyone who engages with my videos and hope you stick around for my future projects. But for now, thank you for watching.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?